Hi, this is Tim Santoni with Santoni Investigation, and I'm host of the Ask a PI show. Today, we're here with Brian Willingham from Diligentia Group in New York. Welcome, Brian. And before we get started, let Brian introduce himself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, and then we can get started.
Sure.
Go ahead,
Well, I
Brian.
appreciate you having me. I am a private investigator. I've been a private investigator for about 15 years now. I took a little bit of a circuitous route to the profession. I started back when I was in high school. I took an aptitude test that said I should be a private investigator or an air traffic controller. But what I really wanted to do was play baseball, and I wasn't that good, and it took me until I was about 14 or 15 years old to realize that. Then I wanted to become the general manager of some baseball team. But anyway, I decided to kind of get into the sports profession, and did that and worked with the New York Giants, worked with Major League Baseball. And then after a number of years of doing that, decided to kind of sort of follow my passion. I joined an investigative firm here in Westchester County, New York, just north of New York City. And I was there for about 8 years. It was my father's firm. And then, so I've been out on my own for about 7 years now. So that's a little bit about me. And I've been living in New York. I've had the opportunity of living in Spain for a couple of years. And I have a couple beautiful kids and a wife, and that's about much of who I am.
Well, great, Brian. In our conversations that we've had prior, we're both very passionate about elevating the level of the private investigation industry, and we're really keen on educating people through, your excellent blog on your website and through my show, and we kind of have some similar passions in that regard. So maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about kind of the general state of the private investigation industry from where you see it, some kind of current trends, and kind of where you see it going.
So I think anybody who's in this profession, and I have these kind of discussions with colleagues and investigators quite often. There's certain perceptions that the general public has about investigators, or what they can do, what they can't do, and it's usually not all that good. And it took me a long time to sort of understand that. In fact, when I first got in the business, one of my colleagues said that when he'd always go to a dinner party, he would always introduce himself as a garbage man, because he didn't want to have to describe what he did to people, and people thinking that he was doing something shady or unethical or illegal. So he described himself as a garbage man, and it really took me a long time to sort of figure that out. And there's this general perception in the industry that we do a lot of shady, illegal things. There's misperceptions about kind of the information that we can obtain, and what we do on a daily basis. A lot of it, has been from movies and sort of characters on television that have sort of changed those perceptions of people. But there's also, it's kind of through our own fault as well. There's been a lot of high-profile cases where investigators have gone over the line and obtained information either illegally or whatever the case may be, and served jail time because of it. And unfortunately, I follow the profession quite closely. It's something I'm really passionate about. And unfortunately, the news about investigators in general, the general news cycle of investigators, it sheds us in a not so great light. Investigators being charged with doing something illegally, posing as a police officer, obtaining illegal records. There's a pretty high-profile case right now where an investigative firm in New York City was pretexting and obtaining information illegally. So those are the things that I see in the news cycle. And, this is kind of backed up by other data, too. A couple of years ago, there's this really interesting thing called Google Consumer Surveys, where you can poll thousands of people for a relatively low fee. And so I polled 1,000 people and asked them a couple different questions. One is, what is the word that describes an investigator best? And there were 6 terms, which I can't think of all of them. The term that most people chose was, I can't think of it right now. It was a pretty good term, though. It was something to do with being sort of, my goodness. Anyway, it'll probably come to me at some point. But it was a relatively good term. But the second term that came up was shady. So and 90% of people thought that we did something illegal at least some part of the time, which is just not the case. I mean, you know, there's this just general perception. Hey, there are investigators that out there that do illegal things, but that's not a perception that I think is something that, you know, as an industry we want to carry. And some investigators sort of revel in it. Some people, you know, like the fact that they have this sort of reputation, and they sort of utilize it to the best of their abilities. But that's not me, and that's not something who I am. And I've spent a lot of time writing about these things and blogging and talking to people and with anybody who will listen about sort of the perception in the industry.
Yeah, great, Brian. Yeah, so along those lines, in terms of the work that you're doing, I mean, what kind of efforts have you taken to kind of strengthen the industry, kind of reveal the truth behind it, you know, kind of bring truth to what's really happening, and you do a pretty good job of that in the things that you're writing about, and, you know, being very honest and upfront. But share with us a little bit about, you know, what you've done and why you think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a similar story to what you have, is that, you know, I get inquiries and calls on a daily basis about things that I can't do, are illegal. And so, you know, a lot of the things that, you know, people asking me to break into other people's houses, you know, a variety of things that are just flat out illegal. So because of these misperceptions and the things that I read about and things that people contact me about, you know, what I've tried to do, I decided to start writing about them. When I started my own business, you know, blogging was sort of kind of an up and coming way for investigators to sort of spread their voice, or small businesses to sort of spread their voice. And I just started writing about it. And a lot of them, colleagues of mine who I've been very good friends with, you know, it was kind of revealing some sort of secrets, so to speak. And they weren't all that happy with me, to be perfectly frank. And to me, it was kind of just like a release. It was just kind of trying to help the industry. I was trying to sort of attract business and clients that way, people who wanted to use somebody who was ethical, doing things ethically, illegally, and legally. So, you know, blogging has been sort of my way of doing things, just similar to how you're using sort of YouTube and the Ask a PI show about answering questions that you get often. Writing has sort of been my way of doing it. You know, and I think for me, it has become much more natural for me. But writing about it and talking about it to sort of anybody who will listen.
Sure. So one thing that we talked about, and we talked about over the years, is the fact that, you know, working with clients on a day-to-day basis, we're trying to uncover things that are very difficult, and oftentimes we may not get the results that the client desires, or that they want, or they think are possible within a time frame. So you mentioned it, you know, all goes back to trust. And so what are some things that, you know, you do to build trust with the client so that they understand that, look, when you're working with Brian and Diligentia Group, that, you know, we are going down every rabbit hole and we are doing a thorough job, despite what the results may reveal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, our industry differs from others in the sense that, you know, as a plumber or as a professional service provider, you know, you can kind of, the outcome is relatively predictable. If you are hiring a plumber to come and fix your whatever, or fix your house or redo your house, you expect your house to be redone in a good, timely fashion. As an investigator, you are given tasks to do, trying to find information, do surveillance on somebody to uncover some sort of facts. And the truth is we can't predict what is going to happen next. The client may believe that there's something that exists, or some massive fraud that is going on, or that, you know, your wife is cheating on him, or the husband is cheating on him. But the truth is that we are given certain sort of limitation and boundaries about what we can and can't do. And if we go out there and don't find anything, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but the results are not always you know, known before we start anything. And it becomes very challenging. And I think, you know, one of the ways that I utilize is, this honesty and trust thing is something that is sort of permeated throughout my business, who I am, and about how I blog, how I talk to people. And I'm very brutally honest with people. And sometimes it may lose me cases because I tell them that I don't think it's possible about what we can do. I can think of a case that I spoke to a woman last week who was willing to give me a couple $1,000s for a particular matter to identify some assets. And the woman, had very little money, and coming up with the $1,500 or $2,000 that she wanted to do, I just didn't think was a smart decision. And I basically told her that she would be better off doing something else, despite the fact that she was dying to hire me. And I think, being brutal, I was brutally honest with her, saying, I don't think this is going to be helpful to you. And you establish a sense of trust. And it doesn't, I can think of a couple of cases where I have not been successful in, for example, finding people. One of the things that we specialize in is finding very difficult to find people with, with very little information. And we're not going to always be successful. We can try our hardest. We're going to use all the methods and knowledge that we have, but we can't, it's impossible to always be successful. So, honesty, being honest, and that sort of permeated throughout the process. And over communicating. That's one thing that I'm constantly a proponent of is, keeping in constant communication with a client, regardless of whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, about, what your availability is, how much time you think it's going to take. And if you are failing or you forgot about something, I'll admit it. And that's not I don't think that's natural to everybody. It comes natural to me, but that's how I handle these kind of situations.
Sure. So obviously building that trust up through the open communications, and you say we're an industry that the results come in a variety of different forms. Like I said, we don't know what the next day is going to turn up, and so based on that, the path of investigation and what the client's expectations are going to change as well. So it's a really good point. Getting into a case and expecting results in a certain way is often a bad thing for an investigator.
Yeah, I think managing expectations, I think that's a very important thing. And the way that I manage expectations is, providing those sort of possibilities of like, listen, this is what we're hoping is going to happen. These are the steps that I'm going to take in order to get there. And we're going to be successful. But the truth is that we don't know. And by doing that, and you're not telling a client, and I've heard this from other people who've called me about other investigative firms who have basically claimed the world, saying, hey, we're going to nail this, or we're going to get this. And I think it's just a bad approach. It's a bad business model, by making promises that you are not sure that you're going to be able to keep. You're just setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. So, you do get a bit of education on that, and I've listened to you speak and hear you talk about different things. We obviously live in an information age where there's a ton of information available online and available through a variety of resources, whether there's publicly available or commercial databases that investigators and other legal professionals have access to. But at the end of the day, knowing where to look, how to look, and where to dig is super important. So, what do you say to clients when they call and they say, well, Brian, we know we have access to Westlaw and we have access to LexisNexis. How is me hiring you going to be any different than what I can do on my own? Yeah,
it's a very good question. And it's something that, I discuss with other people quite often, and one of the sort of metaphorical examples I can provide is, if I hand you a drill to fix something, and I hand my daughter a drill to fix something, or even somebody else, or a carpenter to fix something, you're going to get very different results. So the tools aren't necessarily, they help you complete a job, but they're not necessarily going to be the be all end all. And tools are very important. I need those tools in order to succeed. But, it's taking those tools and that next level of analysis and research that you can do beyond those tools. They help you sort of determine where people are, some information about people, But it's that next level of research that is absolutely critical, and the analysis of it. And the other example that I'd like to provide is, I am a practitioner of my craft, so to speak. I'm an investigator. I do this every single day. One of the things that, that has changed over the past number of years is things like social media, and the way to mine data has just become very different. And because I work on this craft every single day, I kind of know those ins and outs and how to do those things, which is not always the case if you don't practice that craft every day. For example, an accountant or an attorney, if you need a specialist in tax, an attorney who specializes in estate planning, I can write my own will. It's probably not going to be very good. Or you can hire, the attorney down the street to make a will. But if you have somebody who practices his craft every day and is an estate planner and does this, will know the ins and outs and all the nuances that are required, especially if you have a complex estate or a complex matter, which, in most cases, an investigation is a complex matter. So I think as an investigator, I'm not afraid of telling people what my tools are either. I mean, it's one of the things that many investigators will not. I use LexisNexis, I use Westlaw, I use TLO, I use Accurate, I use Google. And in some cases I've been solved because of something I've Googled. But that doesn't, having knowledge of all these things and knowing where to go and how to navigate these things in an effective manner is something that I do every day, and that's what makes me different than an amateur, so to speak, who doesn't do this every day. And I don't consider myself, one of the things I have is I don't consider myself an expert in much of anything. I am perfectly willing to accept the fact that, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, but I do know that I'm really good at this. I'm going to do things that maybe not everybody can think of. I have a vast array of resources available to me, including other investigators who I contact daily about some specific type of matter that I can call up and say, hey, have you ever worked on a case like this? Do you have any knowledge of these kind of things? Somebody who might be an expert in, forensic accounting or surveillance, which I don't do really much anymore. So anyway, that was a kind of a long-winded answer to the question, but I think the big thing is that I practice my craft on a daily basis, and that what makes me different than people who don't.
Sure. And I like to say too that, we live in an information age where technology is changing daily. We have applications that are entering the market every day, updates every day. And like I say, if you're not practicing it every day and knowing those nuances and changes, it's very difficult to track those that are manipulating, committing fraud, and utilizing them to defraud businesses and other people. It becomes impossible to know all those different things unless you're actually doing it. You made reference to the different sources that your resources utilize, and maybe there's not one tool that you like over another, but what's one thing, Kay, in the last year or two, technology-wise or advanced, that's really helped you bridge the gap in your overall day-to-day practice in terms of just general background intelligence gathering on a subject? Maybe it's for a background or an asset or even a locate investigation. What's one piece of technology that you say, hey, this is something that, gosh, I use every day?
TLO would be that example of, TLO is kind of the new database out there that kind of everybody uses. I do a lot of locating individuals, trying to interview witnesses. So that is a tool that I use pretty much on a daily. It would be a kind of a tie between TLO and LexisNexis. LexisNexis is absolutely indispensable. I probably use TLO more because it's kind of most of that is related to identifying contact information and where people live and trying to interview witnesses and those kind of things. So that winds up being a tool of choice. And the reason I like TLO is, one, I think the data is actually pretty good. One of the issues with databases in a broad sense is that if you have bad data in there, you're not going to get a good result. So I think their data is pretty good, pretty up to date. I don't rely on them 100%. I use multiple databases, which I think is something that most investigators should be doing. I don't think most investigators do, but I will use up to 5 or 6 databases to verify that an address is accurate. But because of its ease of use, I really liked it's very simple, easy to use, it's quick. And LexisNexis is absolutely indispensable for me. Just the amount of data and news and corporate records and UCC filings. I mean, the data that exists in there far exceeds what you would find in TLO. But one of the things that I talk about constantly is that these databases only get you so far, because not everything is in databases, and sometimes you just need to kind of think outside of the databases in order to get information.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that I have this conversation probably on a daily basis with clients and with my investigators in my office, is that the databases, they try to be, and they claim to be comprehensive, but that's to assume that the root of those databases are public records and other resources that they're pulling and reselling, and to assume that those are complete and accurate. For instance, DMV across 50 states doesn't exist through a TLO or through a LexisNexis or court records and things like that. And I think that one of my main goals is to educate people, especially in the legal sector, that look, while you think it's comprehensive and you think it's attracting all the records in that particular jurisdiction, that there are gaps. And I think people, like you say, single source things, and they don't have access to multiple databases. And so they believe, well, because it's in a report and they've paid for it, that it must be accurate. And I think that's a huge point that people need to understand, is that it's not verified. It's simply a reflection of another database or a public record that could found in, have mistakes.
And I think, to that point, the criminal records are sort of the, holy grail of background investigation information. And one of the sad truths is that you cannot get a comprehensive criminal record search on anybody through some sort of nationwide database. And, it's a term that gets thrown around quite often. I see it on message boards for investigators who want a source for a nationwide database, and it just doesn't exist. And the fact that people are selling a product that even claims to be a nationwide criminal record search, I think it's just a poor reflection of what we do. And, for example, New York, for example, there's absolutely no criminal records that you can get through any database in New York. You have to pay $66 to the Office of Court Administration and conduct a statewide criminal record search. It's the only way to do it. So somebody that wants to do a $10 criminal search and sell it to a client for $15 or $20, whatever, however they want to do it, it's just, it's sad, because the product that you're providing to a client is not comprehensive, it's not good, and it's critical to know what you're doing, what the information that is contained within these things, before you promote it or sell it.
Right. And I mean, we fight that on a daily basis in our employment background screening division of our business. Clients are like, well, I don't understand. We're paying for a national criminal database search. So why would we search anything else? And I'm like, okay, well, let's back up a step. That's to assume that there's such a thing as a national criminal database. It's only searching certain jurisdictions, and the records obtained are very limited. Oh, okay, well, why wouldn't I just do that one by itself? Okay, you're going back and forth and back and forth. And it's like, and again, the time shifting that we talked about. And I think that the idea that an instant criminal background or an instant locate is out there because we have access to a lot of computer databases is another thing that we talked about, and kind of that time shifting aspect. In our previous conversations, Brian was telling us that, really what he sums it up really well. As an investigator, we are the last resort for our clients. And so setting the expectations, building that trust, and kind of coming up with the timeline, a realistic timeline, is super important, because sometimes the client believes, well, I can point and click and get the information. I should be able to call Brian and I should be able to get that information right now. And in some cases that's possible. In other cases, it's simply impossible. And it's just something that needs to be set up front. Yeah. Okay, Brian, as we finish things up here, I mean, in terms of the databases, we talked about your favorites, but in terms of like a plugin or an app or searching social media and kind of online, internet related searches, is there a favorite app, widget, tool that you like, or a website?
The one that I've been using quite often, PictureMate, is a Chrome extension that I've been using quite often. It's kind of a quick way of finding hidden photos within Facebook that are related to a particular profile. And there is also one called, it's designed, I forgot exactly what it's called, but it's designed by Intelligent Software. And it's a way to find people on Facebook by different characteristics. So it'll allow you to type in just a name or a first name and a place that they live, or a place that they worked. So those are two tools that I use constantly from an investigative point of view, just because, partly because Facebook has just become so immensely popular and it's just so widely used. There's tons of other sort of social networks out there that are obviously becoming popular, but a lot of them do a much better job in protecting people's privacy. Facebook is still kind of still lagging behind, or people just not aware of how to sort of protect themselves on Facebook. So so those are the couple tools that I use sort of on a daily basis. I've got them up right now on my computer, and I've probably used them 3 or 4 times already today. So those are the couple that I come off the top of my head.
Great. And Brian, as we close out this interview, maybe just give us a rundown of best way for people to connect with you if they want to find out more about your capabilities as an investigator in your company, and also maybe giving us a sense of what is your favorite type of case as we close out this interview.
So you can, my blog is at diligentiagroup.com, DILIGENTIA group.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. It's totally free. I've written about 200 or 300 articles relating to various points of investigation. And it's for anybody who's interested in the profession. We have quite a broad range. There's a lot of investigators that are on it, but also a lot of potential people who are interested in just the investigation side of work. And so that's probably the best way to reach me. And you can reach me at brian@diligentiagroup.com. As far as my favorite types of cases, I mean, listen, you don't always get to pick your cases. And that's one thing that's kind of unfortunate. There's certain cases that you do to pay the bills, and certain ones that you really, really enjoy. And the ones that really stand out in my mind are those sort of difficult to find people. I put people together that, long lost family members, long lost parents that they haven't been in touch with in 20 or 30 years. In some cases, we've had to send people out on the ground to a woman who was living in a trailer park in the middle of Oregon, and we sent somebody out there to help find her. So, those are the ones that I think are the most rewarding. They don't come around all the time, because they become very, they're time consuming and they require a lot of time and resources. People have spent their whole lives looking for this person. And again, we're used as this last resort. And by the time they get to us, they've done everything that they possibly can. And we've had a lot of really good success with them. Sometimes we're not successful. But they're the most rewarding, because it's putting together people. There's always a good story and always a sort of a happy ending at the end of those.
Well, great, Brian. Again, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to connect with us on the show. We will obviously provide some links to some of the things that Brian's talking about in terms of those applications and technology that he's referring to. Just want to close out the show by saying, my name is Tim Santoni. My company's Santoni Investigations, and I host the Ask a PI show, which is on YouTube. If you have any questions that you want to ask, you can tweet them to me at TJSantoni, or send them to me via email, tsantoni@santoniworldwide.com. And look forward to connecting with everyone in the comments. Thanks.